what I was thinking. Wir muss reinhaben. Wir darf lichtig machen.
Ja.
Schkeucher.
Ja. So ist es. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Lev, Daf Lamed Beis. We began the sugya yesterday in the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis on the bottom of the Amid regarding someone who eats, a non-kohen who eats chametz dika truma on Pesach. The Mishnah says that if the person did so b'shogeig, then they have to pay keren v'choimish, as the pasuk tells us in Parshas Emor. This is the atonement needed for a non-kohen who eats truma b'shogeig b'chlal during the year. Same will be on Pesach as well, even though it was chametz dika truma. And if a person ate it b'mezid, as we explained in the Mishnah, even though normally you have to pay the keren, but being that chametz on Pesach is of no value, has no value, you stole nothing, you're going to be pater mitashlumin. Now we're going to have the Gemara analyzing how are we to view the character of this repayment for someone who eats truma b'shoigeg. Is it compensation or is it restoration? Lefi mida mishalem, you have to return the exact volume that you took, or lefi damim mishalem, you have to pay back in the equal amount of value. L'kula alma, you have to pay back with produce. The question is again, is it the same amount of volume of produce, mamish the same amount of volume or value, as we spoke it out and as we'll learn in greater detail in today's shiur. That is an indicator whether this is called restoration or compensation. That will all explain the din of the Mishnah better. Really, the Gemara is going to point out that this itself is a machlokes tanoim. We're going to be learning a brisa that states that hamafrish trumas chametz on Pesach. If you separate trumas chametz, just for example, when grain grows, before you make it into anything, when it's still grain, if it rains on the grain, especially if the kernels are cracked, they become chametzdik. Now, grain is something from which you have to separate trumas. If a person did so on Pesach, says the brisa, that divrei hakol eino kedosha. Divrei hakol means, even according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, as we have been learning, that holds that chametz bepesach is muter bahano, that separation will not take hold. This part of this, some of the dinim that, for example, this one will be better explained, God willing, on Daf Lamed Gimel. But continuing a quick recap of Daf Lamed Beis, we're going to be asking what is the minimum amount of truma that one must separate, that one must consume, eat, the shoygeg, for which you're going to be chayv to pay not only the keren but also the choimish. We're going to have the sheet of Abba Shol that speaks about the need of you consuming at least the value of a pruta. And Rav Papa's initial understanding that Abba Shol meant not only a pruta, but it has to be a value of a pruta and the volume of a kezayis, which means if you'll have less than the volume of the kezayis, even though you ate a pruta's amount, so as far as compensating for what you took, you have to return. You stole, you have to give back the moment you hit the pruta or more. But the choimish only kicks in when you have both a pruta and a kezayis, and then ultimately the proof we're going to have that Rav Papa retracted his initial understanding of Abba Shol, and now everyone understands that Abba Shol is saying that all it needs is to have the value of the pruta. There is no kezayis involved at all, with many other moededike prate dinim. Chavre, let us start on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Right, the Gemara's beginning of the Gemara, we're going to end up relearning the Mishnah as we get into the Sugya and Daf Lamed Beis. We're speaking about, yes, someone who ate Truma, non-kohen who ate Truma, and as we will apply it ultimately if that happened on Pesach. So let's begin learning a Mishnah in Truma. Tanan Hassan. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shachar kol nivra. Ha'ochel Truma b'shoigeg. A non-kohen b'shoigeg, not knowing that it's Truma, consumed that Truma. Now, Mishalem, Keren, V'choimish. Here, this is based on a pasuk, as we'll learn soon. He has to pay back to the kohen from whom he took that truma, not only the keren, the value, but he has to add a halachic fifth. Says the Mishnah, that goes, this punishment of choimish is not if you ruined the kohen's truma, for which also avadi you'll have to compensate. But this din of adding a choimish is only if you ate the truma. And eating means whether you ate it, the echad hashoiser, whether you drank it, the flamed days, the echad hasach, anointing yourself with truma is tantamount to consuming it. Echad truma temeya, the echad truma tahoira. In all of the cases, says the Mishnah, mishalim choimish, you have to pay your choimish. In other words, if a person destroyed the property of a kohen, you burnt his chametz, you burnt his truma, excuse me, you have to compensate. You have to pay back for the damage that you did, like any other act of theft. But this unique din of keren v'choimish is only when you ate it. Another interesting din, says the Mishnah, that the chumsha, that if the person then, after separating the keren v'choimish to pay back the coin, if someone, again, b'shoigeg ate the choimish, the din is he has to pay back a keren and an additional choimish for the choimish that he ate. What does that prove? From what do we see? That the food that you use to compensate, to pay back the kohen, that in itself also becomes truma. So since it in itself becomes truma, including the choimish, if someone, the same person, another person, if they eat up that choimish, so here again, you're going to have to pay a keren v'choimish on top of the choimish. End of quote. In other words, what we clearly see from this Mishnah, all of these dinim that you have to pay back keren v'choimish by consumption, and that the food that you use to pay back is in itself holy. It becomes imbued with kedushas truma. Now, says the Gemara by Elyahu, what they asked was that kishahu mishalem. Okay, I get it. You have to pay back with produce. Is it lefi mita mishalem? You have to give the equivalent amount of measure. You ate a pound of grain, give back a pound of grain, plus the choimish, plus the halachic choimish. You have to pay back with produce. But I don't say, well, you ate a pound, pay back a pound plus a choimish. No. How much was the pound worth? What was the value? Give back the equivalent value plus a choimish with produce. But it's not going to be a pound because the price can fluctuate. Now, hold on. The Gemara wants to clarify this by when we speak about price, a price fluctuation, obviously it can go up, it can go down. So let's clarify that as well. So says the Gemara, we're going to limit the boya. If in the beginning means at the time of the consumption, whatever it was that this zod, this non-coin ate, was worth, let's say, 4 zuz, and now that he wants to pay with produce, now that same produce with that same amount went down in price, is only worth 1 zuz, which means that if he gives this back to the coin is going to receive something of value less than what was taken from him, then loiti boyalach, that you can't get away with it. The vadai kidimi ikonim mishalom lefi damim. You have to pay the higher amount. Why would you have to pay produce, but in the higher amount? Because the ligara migazlan. How is this different than any act of gezela? In other words, if I took something away from you, God forbid, if I stole something from you, I have to always compensate. I have to give back that which I took. And as we learned, Mishnah Bavakama, Kol Hagazlanim, when we say have to give back, at what time do we look at the value of the theft? Mishalmin Kishas Hagzela. The Shas Hagzela here is when he ate it. So if it was worth 4, and now the same amount of produce is substantially worth less, for sure you can never get away with giving back the less, even though you added a choimish. So what? The question is, as far as paying back, as far as compensation is concerned, if you would give back the same amount, he would be fully compensated. He ate a pound of grain. When he ate it, it was worth 1 zuz. Now, if he were to return that same pound, independent of the choimish, with the choimish, but the same pound now was worth 4 times the amount. Shavi So the person who waited says, I only want to give you back a 4th plus a choimish. I'm not going to give you back the whole pound. It's worth 4 times the amount. So that's the kash. Do we say lefimi the mishalim? What all we care about is volume. All we care about is volume. It's about restoration. It's not about compensation. As we were learned the Rashi yesterday in the Mishnah, it's about kapara. It's about kapara. For I ate a pound, I got to give back a pound. The Amarle, we tell him, or the client tells him, or Beis Din tells him, listen here, my friend. Geriva achal. Geriva means a measure. You ate a measure, whatever, lamashal a pound. So geriva mashalim, pay back that measure plus a chaimish. You're giving back something of greater value. We don't look at the value. It's not about compensating. No, it's about compensation plus a penalty of a chaimish, but it's about compensation, and therefore it's about value. Lefi damim mishalim. So again, you for sure give it back in produce, but you're going to end up giving back a much less. You're going to give a quarter of a pound plus a chaimish of the quarter of the pound. In other words, bezuza achal, and therefore bezuza mishalim, give back the same value. Value or volume. That is the boya. And obviously, as we'll bring all this back to our Mishnahs, when we learned the Mishnah, we explained the whole reason why eating truma dika chametz on Pesach, for you b'chlal to be chayiv to pay back anything, even though it has no value, was all based on the concept that b'shoigig, the whole din, is not about compensation, it is about restoration, which means l'chayr, it's not about damim, there's no value at all, it's about midah, but let's play this out in the Gemara. Okay, so that's the kash. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, Tashema, coming here, it says in a Braisa regarding again a non-kohen eating trumon. We're not up to Pesach yet. We're not up to Chametz yet. Achel groi geres or groi geres. If a non-kohen ate figs that were trumon, belonging to a kohen, and the shilim like the tamadim, and he pays back with day, it says the Braisa, ooh, nice, Tavi olav bracha, may he be blessed. Now, what added benefit did he give for the Tana to bless him? So, that the rule is lefi midah mishalem. You got to give back the same amount of measure, of volume. And this is based on the understanding that dates are more valuable than figs. So that's why Tav alav bracha. Because the achal geriva de groigeris, which is only worth 1 zuz, he's giving back the same volume as you have to. That's the reason, if that's the halacha. Because you have gevira to tamarim, which tamarim dates are worth a lot more, the shavia arba. So the Mishnah is blessing him. He's anyways giving back of the same value. The kohen lost the value of a zuz, and bezucha mishal is the charaya that you don't pay back based on value. It's only about volume. Mida, not damim. So Amar Abaye, that's not a proof. Lo'ilam lefi damim, eloma elvida mishalim. That's when you eat it b'shoigig. Amai tavi olav bracha. Even though the value of the dates are the same value of the figs, but the figs were not as desirable, and therefore they were not as, let's say, marketable. If you wanted to sell them, it would take you a longer time to find customers. Dates was a more marketable commodity. So for that in itself, the Braisa can say, Tavi alav bracha. He ate figs. Not everyone was interested there in this place in the figs. There was so much of them. And he's returning, he's repaying, right? Maybe only lefi damim. So it's going to be actually a much lesser volume, but still, because now the kohen who receives it, right, will have something that is a lot more desirable. Now, understand something. The food that you pay the kohen back with becomes truma. Truma may only be eaten by kohanim, but it's still marketable because a kohen can sell it to a fellow kohen. And whatever, and any item that is more desirable is an item that's easier to sell. So in the Vaila, we have the question open with no proof from the Braisa from Groigeres. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, and now we go, Trumas Chametz Pesach, that if a non-kohen eats Chametz Dika Truma on Pesach, says our Mishnah, B'shoigig Mishalom Karen V'choimish. Says the Gemara, I Amrad B'shloima, Lifi Mida Mishalem, Mamish, the way we learned Rashi in the Mishnah, then the din makes sense. What's the challenge in our Mishnah? Why would you have to pay anything when chametz has no value? It's us even bahana'ah. But if you pay lefi midam, the fact that you don't have to pay back the value, paying back volume, restoration is a raya that it's not compensation, like we explained. It's like a kapara. Okay, a kapara you need to have. You ate b'shoigeg truma. Elyahu if you don't mishalim chametz b'pesach bar damimu asur b'no. So that's a proof that the payment, this unique din, that if a person ate, not damaged, ate truma from a kohen, that they have to pay back keren v'choimish, is not a din of damim, it's not a din of compensation, it's a din of restoration. You have to make restoration to achieve a kapara. And l'choira, our Mishnah will prove. Says the Gemara, no, you have no proof from our Mishnah. Why? Because maybe you pay lefi damim. Not lefi volume, but the value. Why do you have to pay anything? Maybe our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Okay, these were the three Tanoim that we learned about on Daf Chavtes, correct? The Amar Chametz b'Pesach, or Daf Chavches days into Daf Chavtes, is muter b'hana. So since you took something that does have value, that's the Tana of our Mishnah. That's why you have to compensate. Says the Gemara, doesn't fit. If that will be the Tana of our Mishnah, what's the next din in the Mishnah? That if you ate the mazid, you're part of the Saiminat Hashlumin. And like we learned in Nashi, and if the Truma was Tameya, right, which the coin normally would have used for Demei Eitzim, you don't even pay Demei Eitzim. Hold on. If our Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, am I about to make Demei Eitzim? Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it's Mutar Bahana. Says the Gemara, still I'm going to argue that maybe our Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Why is it that if you ate the Truma, b'mezid, you don't have to pay anything? There's no compensation? Because our Tana also holds like Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. We just had Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. Let's quickly recap Baal Peh. L'kula alma, there's a concept of kam lei b'derabba minei. Sometimes it's with ayud, kim lei b'derabba minei. That l'kula alma refers to someone who does a sin, does one act, that has two different avedas connected to it, for which one, for example, a person burned down his neighbor's home on Shabbos, God forbid. So for the act of lighting a fire, you're chayiv skila. For the act of burning down your fellow's house, you have to compensate the money that you made him lose. So the rule is, since you're chayiv misas based in, you're going to be exempt from a based in, from a human court to pay back the value of the damage that you affected. And by the way, just to chazir another din, we learned in Ksubis that there's a ton of devei chizkiyahu, that when we say kam lai b'derabba minei, even if the person's the actual burning down the house on Shabbos was not done b'mezid, and therefore he won't be chayiv skila, since it's a sin for which had he done it b'mezid, he would have been chayiv capital punishment. We also say kam lai b'derabba minei. There is such a shita, that's a shita of devei chizkiyahu, but that's only when we're using kam lai b'derabba minei by a capital punishment and payment. But now we have the additional das yachid of Rav Nechunya ben Hakana, that we apply the same concept even where there is no capital punishment in a beis din, even if the sin or the graver sin is a punishment in the hands of God, which is either kadis or misa b'dei shamayim. Here we also say kam lai b'derabba minei, but over here no one says Rav Nechunya ben Hakana and Tana devei chizkiyahu. No one puts them together. Here you only say kam lai b'derabba minei if you're taka chayev either kadis or misa b'dei shamayim, because the act was done b'mezid. Now we have to go into another nuance, beautiful, about exactly when the Mishnah spoke about shoygig and mezid. And our Mishnah, was it that the person was a shoygig in the Pesach or a shoygig in the Truma? Were you b'mezid in the Pesach? Yeah, comments on Pesach, or were you amazed that you knew that it was a client's Truma? We're going to clarify that here in a moment. But our Mishnah maybe is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and it's also holding back in the Nechunya ben Hakana, the Tanya, Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana hayoisa as Yom Kippurim, Kishabis litashlumin, like we just spoke this out a few daf ago. Even though on Yom Kippur, if a person violates Yom Kippur b'mezid, is chayiv kadis, and we're going to apply Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana's din not only to kadis, but the same to misa b'dei shamayim. Eating truma b'mezid is misa b'dei shamayim. And this is what Rashi goes through all the details over here. And what we are saying over here is that the case of mazid in the Mishnah is that the person ate truma b'mazid. He knew it's truma. He didn't know that it was chametz. For that there was a shoygig. Even then, it's going to work because just for having truma b'mazid, you're chayiv misibedei shamayim. Since you're chayiv misibedei shamayim, even though there is value, and normally you took the value away from a kohen, let's go with the pshat that the tashlumin is damim. B'mazid for sure it's damim. Well, you're not chayiv to pay compensation when the act that is mechayiv you for compensation was mechayiv you misibedei shamayim. Kam lei b'derabim even by misibedei shamayim. And if that will be the pshat in the Mishnah, that when the Mishnah says in the Reisha that you ate it b'shoygeg, by shoygeg, both shoygegs, it has to be, Rashi says, sai shoygeg, that you didn't know it was chametz. Because if you would have known that it's chametz, then for eating chametz on Pesach, you're chayiv kares. If you go like Rav Nechunya ben Akana, when you're chayiv kares, kamalei miderabim, you won't have to pay keren v'choimish. Even if keren v'choimish is restoration, but we are going even more that it's compensation. So bottom line is that our Mishnah could be learned like Rabbi Yossi Aglili in the Reisha. It could be learned like Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. So you cannot prove from our Mishnah, you cannot resolve the boya whether this general unique din that if a person eats truma b'shoygeg that are chayiv a keren v'choimish, is it damim or is it midah? That's something that remains open. And indeed,
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Quickly, yes, we have to move.
Yeah, very quickly. In terms of value, based on this kind of the Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you're saying that it's the value of firewood, right? In the case of the shoygeg, what's the value? It's the same firewood. If we weren't saying damim, right? So it's not you ate 5, you replace 5. If you're not doing it that way, then it's just the value of firewood plus a fifth. That's what we're saying.
And you always have to pay it. We'll see more details right now with produce. That's another nuance. It's a very interesting thing, this eating truma b'shoygeg.
But so not according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it has to be damim, right? Because there's no value on right?
That's right. And no, it has to be lefi midah. It has to be lefi midah, you meant. Yeah, okay. Now, so this boy says in Gemara Skitan, and this is going to be successful. It's a machlokes tanoim. And what did we learn? We learned in a brayso. Guys, more details. The same din. Just to remember, when we learn this brayso now, let's remember it good because some of this brayso is going to be explained on Daf Lamed Gimel. But let's go. Trumas chametz b'Pesach. And the Tanach of our Mishnah, which is Rabbi Akiva, is not differentiating shoygeg amazit. Sai b'shoygeg, sai b'mazit. Patur min atashlumin umidmei eitzim. Never has to pay back. Okay? Divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's already you see clearly. Our Mishnah says that b'shoygeg you do have to pay back. Now here we're going to learn clear that the reason why you won't have to pay back like Rabbi Akiva is because Rabbi Akiva holds that the keren v'choimish is the mei damim. It's compensation, and on Pesach there is no value, so there's nothing to pay back. Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri mechayev. Now mechayev obviously is like our Mishnah b'shoygeg. B'mezid no, but b'shoygeg yeah. Amaloi Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri. Hold on, v'chi mahano yesh loiba. Right. Obviously, you see Rabbi Akiva holds lefi damim, so there's no value here. Amalei Rabbi Yechon ben Rabbi Akiva. Hold on. Umahano yesh lo oichel truma tamei kashar b'shari yemois hashana shemishalem. When a zor eats truma tamei, he also has to pay, as we just learned in the Mishnah on top from trumas. So Amalei Rabbi Akiva says no. Im amrat b'truma tamei b'shari yemois hashana. I know that the kohen cannot eat it. But truma tameya could be, you can have hana from it. You actually use it for eitzim. But nevertheless, yesh laba heter hasaka. So that's why there is some value, and that is the value that you have to pay for. There is no value at all. And let me give you an example of what will eating up chametz dika truma be compared to if a non-kohen consumes trumas tusim va'anavim shenitma. If he has foods that are so filled with liquid, they're so moist, there's such a high water content that you cannot use them for fuel. And they're tamei, which means that the only thing they can normally be used for is for fuel. So are you not moida she'ein loy ba loy heter achila v'loy heter asaka? And indeed, in such a case, nothing will have to be compensated for because the taka had no value. There, you can't use it for demei hasaka because there's high water content. Here, it's because of a halacha that chametz v'pesach is asur b'ana. It's all the same thing. Okay. Now, bamed dvarim amurim. That what? Says Rashi, this is very important. This will further in tomorrow in Daf Lamed Gimel. In the bottom, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid, the Mishkachas, Trumas, Chametz, B'Pesach, the Katra. How do you b'chlal have Truma, Chametz, Dika, Truma, and Pesach? That's only going to be, looking back inside the Braisa, B'Mafrish, Truma, V'Echmitza. I mean, Rashi writes, obviously, it could have been that you separated Chametz before Pesach. Okay, that for sure. And then Pesach entered. But even if you made the separation of Truma on Pesach, this is only Shayach. If first you have grain that grew, cut off the grain off the ground, you separated Truma, no water fell on it. And then it rained on it. And when water falls into kernels, especially if they're cracked open, they become chametzik after a while. And that is the case. But just for you to know, a statement that if someone has kernels that are already chametzik, and then the owner separates some of it as truma, that eino kedusha, that the kedusha of chametz will not take hold on top of this. Okay.
Rabbi, according to Rabbi Akiva, he doesn't hold, according to the Mishnah, that he's paying a keren v'chaimish b'shoigeg because of kapara, meaning
clearly, clear, exactly. Tzvik. In other words, Rabbi Akiva for sure disagrees with the Mishnah, and taka because he doesn't hold its kapara, it's damim. That's everything fits. B'diuk. Now, just to say that the divrei hakol over here, right? The divrei hakol ene kedusha is even according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Even Rabbi Yossi Haglili holds that no, you can have hana. Nevertheless, if you separate truma when it's already chametzik on Pesach, it's not going to take hold. And the question is, why not? We'll see that. Okay, we'll see that later. We'll see that on the Flama Gimel. Now let's go weiter. So first of all, has to emach loikas tanai. Now we'll see at the end, somewhere in the middle of Lamed Beis, in the middle of Lamed Beis, why we needed the Tanya Idach. The Tanya Idach is even going to authenticate more that the machloikas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yechel ben Nuri is, as we just said, Atzrika, that Rabbi Akiva holds that lefi damim. So on Chametz b'Pesach you never pay anything, and Rabbi Yechel ben Nuri, which is like our Mishnah, holds no, that it's lefi amida, and therefore b'shoigeg you have to pay. You have to do the kapara. Tanya Idach. Now this Braisa is based on a pasuk we have in Emoir. This is the source for this very unique din. That I'll read the pasuk. The pasuk says that the ish ki yoichal kodesh bishgaga. Kodesh in this pasuk means truma. So the yosaf chamishisoi. All else he has to compensate by adding a halachic fifth. The nosan lekoyen es hakodesh. From here you see many pratim that you have to pay back with produce. You don't pay back with money. That the produce itself becomes truma. It is imbued with kedushas truma. So let's learn nuances of what we learned from the pasuk. So Tanya Ida, when it says v'nasan lakoyen, not the compensation, not the keren v'chaimish, not the mamoin, but the kodesh. Oh, so learns the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who's the Tanakama of this Braisa. Not only do you have to pay back with produce, but you have to give back the exact type of produce of that which you consumed. Not like we learned before, you ate groigeris, you can give back tomatim. He doesn't hold of that. It's not enough just to give back with produce, with food that can become imbued. It has to be identical. And that's from the Es HaKodesh. That davar haroi liyois kodesh. Okay, identical status. And what is he trying to tell you? Prat lo'oichel trumas chametz bepesach. If a person ate, our case, trumas chametz bepesach, right? You can't have chametz on Pesach. And as we also learned above, that truma, that chametz dika truma cannot be imbued with truma. We just had the divrei hakol. Chametz cannot be imbued with kedushas truma. So if you have to pay back with the identical status, you can't give back identical. You ate up chametz, that's truma. What are you going to give back? Nothing you can give back. So therefore, you're completely exempt. Shapatim and Atashlumin, Umidimayetzim, Divrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Look inside Rashi, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. That Prat lo eichel trumas chametz v'pesach. That shekeshem mishalem du gemasan. That's his whole thing. You have to pay back exactly the same thing. Ein shem kodesh chal olav. Like we just mentioned, you cannot imbue chametz on Pesach with kedushas truma. So you can't. So you're exempt, completely exempt. By the way, that's like Rabbi Akiva. However, Rabbi Lazar Chisma, the Tanach Rabbi Lazar Chisma, he doesn't agree with this limud that it has to be identical. He agrees you have to give back with produce, and the produce will be imbued with kedushas truma, but it doesn't have to be identical. So if you ate up trumas chametz v'pesach, pay back, I don't know, with bananas. You said pay back with another produce. You ate this, pay back with groigeres. Pay back with grain. Pay back with grain that's not chametz. Doesn't have to be identical. Now again, there's another detail here, Tzvika. Why are you chayiv b'chlal? Like our Mishnah, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. You're chayiv because he holds, obviously, again, that it's not compensation. Okay, so Amalei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov l'Rozer Chisma. Even if you don't agree with my limit that it has to be identical, okay, but still, what did he eat? He ate chametz. Chametz has no value, so he did not take anything of value. That in itself should exempt him. So same thing like we had before. So Amalei Eliezer Yaakov says, no, how can you compare? You're right, you're not allowed to eat truma tameya, but yes, it has value. You can have hana. So Amalei, now Rabbi Lazar Chisma, as we'll see, he holds af bezu yesh bo heter asaka. Obviously, he holds like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So Rabbi Lazar Chisma B'chal has to be taken out of the whole equation because he holds that you are allowed to have Hanan Chametz on Pesach. He writes clearly the last line of the Amid. She'im Ratza HaKoyin, if the Koyin wants, then Meritza means he can place it. Lifnei Kalboi, for the dog to eat it. Oy Masika Tachas Tavshiloi. And therefore, Aleph, it doesn't have to be identical. Beis, there is value. I hold you have to pay back the canon of the Chaimish Taflam Beis Amid Beis. So now, really, Rabbi Lazar Chisma is out. But from now we have 3 Tanoim that are not out, which is Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri from the first Braisa, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov from the second Braisa. And Amar Abaya, clearly, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Kulis Fidalahu, not like Rabbi Yossi Haglili, as we try to maybe set-sign our Mishnah, but they don't hold to that. They hold Chametz B'Pesach as Asur B'Hana. Yet there's an argument here. So what is their argument? Whether you have to compensate when the Zod ate Chametz Dika Truma B'Shoigeg, U'Baha Pligi, that Rabbi Akiva holds Lefi Damim Mishalim. Lefi Damim, since he doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi Haglili, there is no value, you're completely exempt. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri holds Lefi Mida Mishalim. Now, why did we bring in the other Braisa? You'll see right now. So it's Gemara Pshita. In other words, Pshita is, we didn't need Rabbi to say that. The Gemara could have just said, Ketanoi, you bring it down, you learn the Braisa. It's obvious that's the Machlokes. So he says, no. Mal the Tema, that maybe Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Nami Rabbi Akiva Sviralei, Damar Lefi Damim. And maybe the reason why Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says you have to pay, maybe he holds like Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Like Rabbi Lazar Chisma, maybe that's his reason. So Kamash Malan, Abaya is Machadasho, that's not Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And how did Abaya know that? The Ema Hachinami. So that's why the Gemara brought the second Braisa. This is brilliant. Because whoever will subscribe to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, like Rabbi Lazar Chisma, will tell that to his Bar Plukta. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri would have said that to Rabbi Akiva the same way that Rabbi Lazar Chisma responded to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That it's who says there's no value. It's just like Truma Tameya. The fact that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri did not respond the way Rabbi Lazar Chisma responded is Aliyah because he does not hold like Rabbi Yossi Haglili. But yet he argues with Rabbi Akiva. In Cain, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Lazar Chisma Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So beautiful. So even though our Mishnah, you can say is like a Rabbi Haglili, but there's no doubt that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, neither of them hold like Rabbi Haglili, and their machlokes whether you have to compensate Keren v'chomesh for eating chametz, truma, b'shoigeg, b'pesach, is this machlokes. Lefi damim, lefi midah. Is it compensation or is it restoration? Restoration means ich macha kapara. I'm replacing what I took, not because of its value. Adarabba, if it has a lot more value, I'll have to pay back with a lot more value. It's not about the value at all. Gavaldik. Okay, now we'll have another nuance in this din of paying back truma that someone ate b'shoigeg with a keren and a chomesh. Tanarabanan. Ha'oichal obviously means b'shoigeg, as we'll see. Again, a non-coin ate. Truma, b'shoigeg. So here, another nuance. How much of it do you have to consume for you to be chayiv to pay back the keren v'chomesh? So says the Tanach, kizayis. Interesting, not a pruta. Kizayis truma mishalem keren v'chomesh. Wow, guys, it's not chametz. This is some. Now that's a big chiddush because normally everything when it comes to tashlumin has to do with the pruta. Now, if you ate less than a kazais, just to make something clear, if I ate b'shoigeg less than a kazais, but the value of a pruta, the Bryce is not saying that I'm off the hook. There's another din. If I took away the value of the kohen, like any other person, I have to pay back. But the din of paying back a chomesh, that's a unique din. Keren v'chomesh is only if the minimum amount was a kazais. That is the Tanakama. Abashol. Now, guys, there's the way we learn Abashol, the way Rav Papa initially learned Abashol, and then at the end, Rav Papa will also agree to the way we're teaching it. Abashol says that nothing to do with the kazayis, not about a kazayis. It has to do with the pruta. So it's very simple. If the value was less than a pruta, gurnish, because not only is there no din of a chomesh, but by gezela also, there's no obligation to return the gezela if it was less than a pruta. If you had the value of a pruta, that's the whole din of the pasuk that we quoted in Emor, that you have to pay back the keren and the chomesh. Keren and a chomesh. Okay. So machloik is kazayis or pruta. Either or. Good. Says the Gemara, my time of the Tanakama. So the pasuk that we quoted in Emor reads again that the ish ki yoichal kodesh bishgaga v'yasav chamishi soy olav v'nasan lakoyin es hakodesh. So in Amud Aleph, we had that brayser from the Es HaKodesh. Now we're going to focus on the words Yoichal. The Tanakama says, it says, the Ish Ki Yoichal, Kodesh Bishgaga. Whenever the Torah uses the words eating, we know the rule, eating in the Torah means a kazais, Pashat. Abashol, Maitama, Amakra, when it says in the Sefer, V'nasan lakoyin, the nasan means you have to give. Really, you're not giving, you are repaying, right? Repaying meint geld, pruta. The nasan ve'enesina, pachus mishava pruta. Okay. I frag the Gemara about Abashol, it says the word yoichal. So the Gemara says, yeah. Like we started today's the shiur, quoting the Mishnah and Trumais, the whole din of keren v'chomesh is not when you're mazik. When you're mazik, you have to compensate. If you took something, if I was mazik the property of the kohen, even if it's truma, it's worth $1, I got to pay back $1. But keren v'chomesh is only when you eat. That's why the Torah says eating, not for the shiur of a kazayis. Just to link the whole din of keren v'chomesh is only when you consumed it b'shoigeg. How prat lamazik udas. The Tanakama also, it says v'nasan, and l'chayda repayment is linked to a pruta. So he says no, that he'll understand v'nasan as we learned Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov on Amud Aleph. V'nasan lakoyin es hakodesh, that holding that it has to be the same produce that you ate, that you have to pay back. That's part of the v'nasan. That's the way we learn pshat. Hahumi boyle ledavar haroy lias kodesh. Okay, now. Hold this machlekes. It's beautiful. The flow is beautiful. So we have a machlekes. Tanakama and Abashol is the shiur for the unique din of shoige keren chomesh kizayis. Abashol again, the way we are learning pshat is not kizayis and pruta. Either or. Hold on. Tanarabana. Same brayse speaking about someone who's eating truma b'shoigeg. Ha'oichel means b'shoigeg. We're not talking about Pesach. We're not talking about chametz. Stam truma. So ha'oichel truma, the pachos mikazayis Mishalem es hakeren ve'eina mishalem es hachoimish. L'cha'ira, this is mamish, the way we explained the Tanakama. But has nothing to do with the pruta. The unique din of the keren only kicks in when you have a kazayis. But again, if it had the value of a pruta, even though it was less than a kazayis, you can't say you don't have to pay. You have to pay, but you don't pay the keren. Now, hechi dami, hold on. Either lace pay, not even a shava pruta, then keren ami lo l'shalem. Because that's a klal throughout the whole Torah, that the obligation in a basin to recompensate is only if the value is a pruta or more. The idi is bashava pruta, so why not chaimish nami l'shalem? Okay, I know we just learned the brisa, but now not everyone knew the brisa. We had a few lines above. So the oilam says the gemara the is bashava pruta, and the afilo hachikiven the leis bekizayis mishalem es hakeren ve'ena mishalem es hachaimish. All of this mamish is the way we learned the Tanakam of Abba Shol. What happened here is moidedik, that when Amrua Rabbanan Kamed Rav Papa, when they told him this latter brisa, he hears it, so he says, this is not like Abba Shol. It's like the Tanakama, but it can't go like Abba Shol, because the Abba Shol, listen to the words of Rav Papa Ha'omar, Kivin sheyesh b'shava prutam, afagav delays bekizayis. Okay. So that's what the Chachamim said. They learned the Braisa, and they said in front of Rav Papa, what we just said, it can't be Abba Shol. It's like the Tanakama. Says Rav Papa, no. Rav Papa obviously initially learned different than Abba Shol. Amalu Rav Papa, no, I feel the same Abba Shol. Abba Shol tartaboya. Abba Shol never meant, according to the initial understanding, that it's not about a kazayis. It is about a kazayis. Abba Shol says, not only does it have to be a kazayis, it also has to have the value of a pruta. Which means, according to the Tanakama, if one ate up kazayis of truma b'shoigeg, even if the kazayis did not have the value of a pruta, he's chayv to pay keren v'chaimish, and it fits so much with our sugya. Why? You didn't take the value. It's not about damim. It's not about damim. It's about you ate. Okay, eating means a kazayis. Abba Shol is the one that added there are two preconditions. Sayid has to have the value of a kazayis, and it has to have the value of a pruta. Azoy tegelem pshat in Abba Shol. Now, this is something, as we'll see, that's not going to fit. Now, even though it says Tanan, this is really a Tosefta, as we see a Tosefta in Trumas, as the Messiah Sashas amends to Vehotanya, Abba Shol Oimer. And as sheyesh boishava pruta, then we're speaking about Truma. There is where chayev b'tashlumin. Guys, tashlumin means keren v'chaimish. This Tosefta is not going into these nuances. It's just about when are you b'chal chayev to keep the pasuk in Emor of eating it b'shoigig, paying back keren v'chaimish. And as she'ein boishava pruta, this is the words of Abba Shol. So it's more elaborate than the words we had in the Braisa above. And on that, the Chachamim tell Abba Shol, no, comes to the Me'ilah, as we're going to give out the going to Me'ilah, there it's about the Pruta. But when it comes to Truma, ad kazayis. Now, says the Gemara against Rav Papa, the im Issa, that Abba Shol requires both conditions. So when Abba Shol said in this Braisa, that it has to have a shava pruta, he didn't mean only a shava pruta. He meant also a shava pruta, saya kazayis and a shava pruta. So then the rebuttal of the chachamim against Abba Shol should have been, even if there's one less. The Im Isa, they should have told him, even as long as there is a kazayis, that's enough. I don't need the other condition. But they didn't word it that way. No, they told him that there's no din of pruta. Mashma that Abba Shol held, it's only about pruta. And indeed, to Yufta, Rav Papa's understanding in the Braisa we learned above is refuted. Abba Shol only holds of a pruta. And the Tanakama only holds of a kazais. Now, this is again linked to the whole topic we had on Amud Aleph. Like, what's the machloikas? I know there's psukim between kazayis and a pruta. If it's about damim is about a pruta. If it's about compensating, then it's about, like we mentioned, because when the Tanakama says kazayis, it doesn't even have to have the value of a pruta. It's just about a kazayis. It's not about value at all. And by the way, says the Gemara that whether Rav Papa saw this Tosefta and therefore And therefore, he re-understood Abba Shaul, not giving a reason as to why did he change his mind. But the Gemara says, we know that Rav Papa changed his understanding in Abba Shaul. And he understood Abba Shaul the way we learned Abba Shaul, the way the Chachamim learned Abba Shaul. And we have enough time, thank God. So we're going to go into a whole mountain, and Rav Papa makes a statement, and from a statement we'll see that indeed he changed his understanding in Abba Shaul. Now the Tanya, this Braisa is focusing on the dinim of Me'ilah. It says at the end of Parshas Vayikra that Nefesh Chisimoil Ma'al the Chata Bishgoga Mikotche Hashem Beheviyas Hashamai. So there's so many pratim when it comes to Me'ilah. Me'ilah, as we just mentioned recently, Machloikas, whether it's also b'mezid. Let's go b'shoigeg. Me'ilah means that if a person inadvertently b'shoigeg misappropriated, had benefit from that which belongs to God, mikotche Hashem. So the din is that the person has to compensate by giving back keren v'choimish and bringing a asham me'ilois. Okay, so when it says in the pasuk v'chata bishgaga zok the braisa prat lemezid, that if the person b'mezid was moyel, they have to pay, but the carbon they don't have to bring. The asham me'ilois is only when it was v'chata bishgaga. Nukuda. So why did I need to have a pasuk to say the words bishgaga when I would have known that on my own? V'haloi dinu. There's l'chayra kal v'chaymer from which we would have known that the carbon asham me'ilois is only b'shoigig. Because umah shad mitzvah shechai behem kares. For example, if a person eats chaylev, God forbid, or dam, what's the din? B'mezid kares. Therefore, that was the beginning of krisus b'shoigig chayv chatas. So the din is that for the mitzvahs that you chayiv kares, choiter es hamezid. When do you bring a chatas? Only when you ate it b'shoigig. If a person ate, God forbid, chaylev b'mezid, they don't bring a carbon. No, normally you would argue if you do a sin b'mezid, it's a greater sin. So for sure, nothing. En kapara l'mechzeh. So it could be there are certain atonements that only are mechaper dafka because it was, so to say, a lesser rebellion against God. If a person did something b'mezid, they need another kapara, but this kapara won't work. And if it doesn't work, then you don't say let it work for part. Either it works or it doesn't work. Well, just like we find by carbon chatois, that for shoigig, you bring a carbon, but b'mezid you don't bring it. So and that's even for sins for which it's a more serious sin. What's the more serious sin? Kares, if you do it b'mezid. Nevertheless, again, b'mezid, you don't bring a carbon. Me'ilah, if you, God forbid, a moyel b'mezid, you chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Now, the din is based on the premise, which is true, that kares is a more serious penalty. It's graver, it's more chamor than misa b'dei shamayim. Kares means many things. It means that, God forbid, the person won't live; he'll pass away relatively young, by 50 or in the 50s. That, God forbid, sometimes a person can pass away childless. By Misa B'dei Shamayim, even if the person passes away young, they live until 60. It doesn't affect their children. And this is another dinim. There's a big discussion amongst the Rishonim exactly what is the difference between Kares and Misa B'dei Shamayim. But this din is predicated on Kares being more chamur. So when it comes to Me'ilah, we're for b'mezid, right? There's no Kares. So yeah, b'shoigeg. So for sure, ein adin shapatar as hamezid. So why did we need to have a pasuk to say that you only have to bring the carbon of Hashem Me'ilah bishgaga? I would have known it b'din. If you did it b'mezid, then for sure you don't bring a carbon. So the Braisa says, no, I wouldn't have had that din. Because who told you, maybe the opposite, maybe Misa B'dei Shamayim is more chamor than kares. Like, that's what's mashma. But the Braisa is saying, I get it, by chaylev, by dam, yeah, kares, yeah, but the mezid, there's no Misa B'dei Shamayim. Maybe that's why if they did it the mezid, they don't have to bring a carbon. That you chayiv Misa B'dei Shamayim is worse. Now this is something very unusual, because what does this Braisa hold? Is kares more chamor or is Misa more chamor? Why did it go back? We'll get to that in a moment, where we will actually, because of this, challenge of understanding such a back and forth in a Braisa, have a complete different understanding in the answer. Bottom line is that there is no din. We would not have known that there's no chiyuv karban hasham ilois if a person was moil b'mezid. So that's why the Torah has to write bishgaga prat lemezid end of Tosefta. Says the Gemara. Listen to this conversation between Rav Nachman by Yitzchak and Abchia bar Ovin. I don't understand this, but I saw Haitana mikara alima leikaris. I mean, the kasha that who needs the bishgaga ahavadin was based on understanding that karis is alima. Karis is more serious, more severe, stronger. And at the end, he says, "Oh, you don't have a kal v'chaymer pumfaket. Misa is stronger. What? Which one is it? Misa doesn't work that way." So and indeed, the Amalei, so Rabchia bar Oven responds to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. No, you didn't understand what the Tana didn't mean that. We know that Kares is more serious than Misa B'dei Shemayim, and in fact it is. It's a more serious punishment. So the kasha is strong. The answer was, the Braisa responded, you don't have a din. Because im amrat bishar mitzvah is guys 3 lines before the bottom of the amid. Shekein lechiev bahem misa, but pachus mikazayis. Shiurim. When is there a chiyuv? Only when you have a kazayis. By Me'ilah, the shiur of Me'ilah is not a kazayis, but the shiur of Me'ilah is a as long as it has the value of a pruta. So there is something more chamur. What's more chamur? That me'ilah, you're chayiv me'ilah for less than a kazayis. Now this is a problem, as we'll see in a moment. So first of all, if this is correct and this is correct, so then now you have a gavaldic response, and that's the meaning of the end of the Tosefta. And when Rav Nachman heard it, he says, "Oh, that's great." So Rav Nachman tells Rav Chia bar Oven, Tanach daitcha. May Hashem bring peace of mind to you. You brought me peace of mind. I was so troubled with this Tosefta, now I got it. Thank you. So Rabbi Chia bar Oven tells Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, I don't know why you are that excited with my own answer. My answer is very problematic. Actually, Rabba and Abshesers shodu banargo. They threw an axe into my answer. They slugged up my answer. How did they refute what I answered? Because man shamat leida amar daf lamed gimel hazed b'meila b'misa. How do you know there's a chiyuv misa? How do you know there's a chiyuv misa? That's only Rabbi. Look inside the top Rashi, the top line in Rashi. Rabbi is the one that says b'misa as he learns exeda shava chet chet. Chet chet, what from what? Meila from truma. Hanas kodesh machilas truma. It says v'chata bishgaga, and it says by truma lis all of chet. And when a person eats truma, that's the source, because truma b'mezid is misa b'dei shamayim. So it must be Rabbi. Let's read back in the Gemara. Titanya that hazed the meila. Rabbi says v'misa. The Chachamim hold if a person is moil b'mezid, the chayv malchus, they're violating a hazara, but there's no misa b'dei shamayim. Okay, so first of all, this whole Tosefta obviously is following Shitas Rebbe. And my Tama the Rebbe, Omar Ababohu, because as we just quoted in Rashi, Gamar Chet Chet Mi Truma, Ma Truma, if a person has Truma, a non-coin eats Truma, B'mezid, the Chayiv Misa B'dei Shamayim, Af Me'ila, B'mezid Chayiv Misa B'dei Shamayim. So now, here's the Rabbi and Absheshes' X in the whole answer that Rabbi Chia bar Oven was giving in his Pshat in the Tosefta. Now that the author is Rabbi, and he learns it from Truma, Ma Truma, guys, look at the next word, Bikazayis, not Pruta. Ma Truma Bikazayis, Af Mila Bikazayis. So therefore, your answer doesn't make sense. So why are you so excited? You Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak that I explained the Tosefta to you. What I said cannot be true. The chumrah of Me'ila is that your chayiv Me'ila even less than a kazais. It can be according to this Tosefta because it goes according to Rabbi. And if you learn chet chet from Truma, then the shiurim should also be learned from Truma. Now, what did we learn now on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis? Hold on. Is Truma by a kazayis? So on that, Maskiv la Rav Papa, really, you can say it's an answer. Rav Papa is trying to find the answer of Rav Chia bar Oven. He's answering the axe that was swung by Rabbi and Absheshes. Hold on. Maybe Rabbi holds like Abba Shol. What does Abba Shol say? Abba Shol says that all of the dinim that we're learning about a Zari eating up Truma is not about a Kazayas. It's about a Shava Pruta. But Aflagav delays about Kazayas. And therefore, good, your answer is great. You explained good shot in the Tosefta. Who said that? Rav Papa. Now we put everything together. For her, behold, says the Gemara, didn't Rav Papa initially understand that even Abba Shaul, who mentioned over here the pruta, meant both? Didn't he say that Abba Shaul tarte boye gewaldig? Ela shmamino hadarba gewaldig. And indeed, so now Rav Papa, as long as we establish that he learns like the Rabbanan, as long as we establish that he learns like Abba Shaul, and Abba Shaul only needs a Shava Pruta, yes, Me'ila is more Chamur. Since Me'ila is more Chamur without the Torah writing in the end of Parshas Vayikra regarding Me'ila V'chata Bishgaga, I might have thought that if you're Me'il, B'mezid, you also Chayiv Hashem Me'ilois. But Mashmal on the Pasik, that's the whole Tosefta, V'chata Bishgaga. Beautiful Chevra to be continued.
So wait, according to Abba Shaul, Rabbi,
yes,
the Truma would also be with the Shava Pruta, right?
One second.
Truma would be with the Shava Pruta, and that's why Rabbi would be able to do Chet. It would be the same. Me'ila and Truma would be the same. It's all about the Pruta.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Rabbi, in general, is there a difference? I mean, there must be a difference. Maybe one of these Reb Leib nuggets when it says Tiyufta once versus where it says twice. Like if it said Tiyufta did a papta Tiyufta, sometimes it repeats it double.
I'm sure there has to be a reason for that. It's interesting over here, even though they slugged him up, in other words, why did Rav Papa change his mind? Could be this is why he changed his mind. Okay, I'm saying another point over here. We're just proving that he changed his mind. We had that before also. But why did he change his mind? The Gemara, maybe that's why he changed his mind.
Good Shabbos. Thank you.
Shabbos, guys.
Shabbos.